Catherine Monroe stood at the iron gates of Blackwood Ranch, her dress torn and mud-stained, her feet wrapped in cloth where shoes had worn through. The mansion beyond rose like a castle, all white stone and gleaming windows under the afternoon sun. She almost turned back. Her hand trembled on the cold metal. 3 days without food had left her weak and dizzy. But then she heard them. Children's laughter, bright and innocent, floating from somewhere inside those walls. Her hand went to her empty stomach. She had to try. She pushed the gate open. The gravel driveway seemed to stretch forever. Each step felt heavier than the last. Catherine kept her eyes down, afraid to look too closely at the beautiful garden, the perfect lawn, the life she'd never have. She didn't belong here. Everyone could see that. But desperation had a way of pushing people past shame. The rancher himself answered the door. James Blackwood. She'd heard his name whispered in town with respect and a little fear. Wealthiest man in 3 counties, they said. Widower. Father to twin daughters he couldn't control. He stood tall in the doorway, dark hair graying at the temples, eyes that looked tired despite his expensive clothes. He studied her ruined dress, her hollow cheeks, her desperate eyes. Catherine waited for him to turn her away. "I need work," Catherine said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Anything. I can clean, cook, mend. I'm a hard worker. I won't cause trouble." James didn't answer right away. He just looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. Not pity exactly. Something else. Recognition, maybe. Like he saw something in her that others had missed. "Come inside," he finally said, stepping back. "Let's talk." The foyer took her breath away. Marble floors, a grand staircase, paintings on the walls that probably cost more than everything she'd ever owned. Catherine felt dirty just standing there. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how she must smell after days on the road. That's when she saw them. 2 identical little girls peering down from the staircase. 7 years old, maybe. Wild, dark curls that hadn't seen a brush in days. Matching defiant eyes. One wore a dress on backwards. The other had dirt smudged across her cheek. They stared at Catherine with the kind of suspicion that came from being disappointed too many times. "Sophie, Clara, come down and meet Miss Monroe," James called up to them. The girls didn't move. They just watched, waiting to see if this stranger would be like all the others who'd come and gone. James led Catherine into his study and gestured to a chair. She sat on the edge, afraid to lean back into the fine leather. He poured her a glass of water, and she drank it too fast, choking a little. He waited patiently while she caught her breath. "I'm going to be honest with you," James said, sitting across from her. "I don't need another maid. I have 3 already. What I need is far more complicated." Catherine's heart sank. She'd come all this way for nothing. "Those girls you saw," James continued, "they've had 5 nannies in the past 6 months. 5 women who quit because they said the children were impossible. Wild, disrespectful, out of control." He paused, running a hand through his hair. "The truth is, they've been impossible since their mother died 2 years ago. And I don't blame them. They're grieving. They're angry. They feel abandoned." Catherine understood that feeling better than he knew. She felt abandoned her whole life, in one way or another. "The nannies try to discipline them," James said. "Strict rules. Punishments. It only made things worse. What Sophie and Clara need isn't someone to control them. They need someone who understands loss. Someone patient. Someone who actually cares." He looked directly at Catherine. "I heard about you in town. Heard you've been asking for work at every house. The general store owner said you had kind eyes. Said you helped her carry packages even though you looked half-starved yourself." Catherine hadn't realized anyone had noticed that. "I'm offering you a position," James said. "Not as a maid, as a companion to my daughters. Someone to help them heal. Room and board included. Generous pay. But I need to know you're serious. Those girls have had enough people walk away from them." Catherine's mind raced. This was more than she'd hoped for. A real room. Regular meals. Safety, at least for a while. but her chest tightened with guilt. She couldn't tell him the truth, couldn't explain that she was running, that staying anywhere too long was dangerous, that the man hunting her would eventually find her, no matter where she hid. 1 month, Catherine heard herself say. I'll give you 1 month. If it's not working, we can part ways. 1 month would be enough time to rest, to eat, to plan her next move. Then she'd disappear before questions started, before her past caught up with her. James studied her for a long moment. She could tell he heard what she wasn't saying, that she was temporary, that she wouldn't stay. But he must have been desperate too, because he nodded. 1 month, he agreed. But Miss Monroe, if you start this and leave after they've gotten attached, it'll hurt them more than if you never came at all. Can you at least try? Really try? I promise, Catherine said. The lie tasted bitter. That first dinner was a disaster. The girls refused to speak. Sophie threw her vegetables on the floor. Clara knocked over her milk on purpose. They stared at Catherine with cold challenge in their eyes, waiting for her to yell, to punish, to prove she was just like the others. Catherine didn't yell. She didn't scold. She just quietly cleaned up the mess and sat back down. She ate her own meal slowly, savoring every bite after days of hunger. The girls watched her, confused by her lack of reaction. After dinner, Catherine was shown to her room. It was the nicest place she'd ever slept. A real bed with clean sheets, a window overlooking the ranch, a door that locked from the inside. She unpacked her small bundle of belongings, her hands shaking. Hidden at the bottom was the only thing of value she owned, a silver locket she couldn't sell because it had been her mother's, and a folded newspaper clipping she kept as a reminder of what she was running from. The headline read, Banker's son sought for questioning in embezzlement scandal. Thomas Whitmore, her husband, the man she'd fled in the middle of the night 6 months ago when she'd discovered his crimes. When she'd confronted him and seen the rage in his eyes, the barely controlled violence. He hadn't hit her then. He never needed to. His words were enough. His control was enough. The way he'd slowly isolated her from everyone she knew. The way he'd made her feel like she was nothing without him. She'd run with just the clothes on her back, change her name, move from town to town, taking whatever work she could find, always looking over her shoulder, always waiting for him to appear. Catherine hid the clipping again and tried to sleep. But at midnight, she heard it, soft crying from down the hall. She followed the sound and found Clara sitting in the hallway, arms wrapped around her knees, tears streaming down her small face. Mama used to sing to us, Clara whispered when she saw Catherine. Every night, but nobody sings anymore. Everybody leaves. Catherine's heart broke. She sat down on the floor beside the little girl, not touching, just being there. After a moment, she began to hum. No words, just a soft melody her own mother had sung long ago. Clara's crying slowed. Her breathing evened out. Finally, she leaned against Catherine's shoulder and fell asleep. From the shadows at the end of the hall, Sophie watched. Her sister looked peaceful for the first time in weeks. Maybe this stranger was different. Maybe. James watched too, from his bedroom doorway. Something shifted in his chest. Something he hadn't felt in 2 years. Hope. Catherine carried Clara back to bed and tucked her in. When she returned to her own room, exhaustion finally pulled her under. She didn't know that in the town 20 miles away, a stranger had arrived that evening. A well-dressed man with cold eyes, asking the bartender if he'd seen a woman traveling alone. Someone who might be using a different name. Someone who might be hiding. The bartender had shaken his head at first, then remembered. Now that you mention it, the sheriff said something about a woman heading out toward the Blackwood Ranch. Looking for work, I think. The stranger had smiled and tipped his hat. Much obliged. Catherine slept peacefully that night, not knowing that Thomas Whitmore was closer than she'd ever feared. That her 1 month of safety might not even last a week. That the family she was already beginning to care for was about to be caught in the middle of her nightmare. The clock was ticking, and morning would bring her closer to the moment when everything would fall apart. 1 week passed like a gentle thaw after a long winter. Catherine woke each morning surprised to still be there, surprised that the girls hadn't driven her away yet. Small victories came in whispers and glances. On the third day, Sophie brought Catherine her torn doll, the one she'd been hiding under her bed. She didn't ask for help, just left it on the kitchen table where Catherine was working. When she returned an hour later, the doll was mended, its dress carefully stitched. Sophie picked it up, ran her fingers over the repair, and said the smallest thank you before disappearing upstairs. That night, Clara knocked on Catherine's door and asked her to tuck her in. Not the nanny, not the maid, Catherine. She requested the humming again, that wordless melody that somehow said everything that needed saying. Catherine sat beside her bed and hummed until Clara's breathing went soft and even. When she stood to leave, she found Sophie in the doorway, watching with those careful, measuring eyes. The girl didn't say anything, but she didn't leave either. Progress came in these small moments, these tiny cracks in the armor both girls had built around their hearts. The mornings became Catherine's favorite time. She'd take the girls out to the garden after breakfast, teaching them about the plants, telling them stories while they worked the soil together. Catherine was careful with her stories, always dancing around her real past, inventing a childhood that was happier than the truth. The girls didn't seem to notice. They just soaked up the attention like flowers turning toward the sun. Their laughter started coming more easily. The fighting between them grew less frequent. Even the servants noticed the change, whispering about the miracle worker who'd tamed the wild Blackwood girls in just 1 week. James watched it all from a distance. He'd catch glimpses through windows as Catherine braided the girls' hair or hear their giggles echoing from the kitchen where she taught them to make bread. One afternoon, he stood in the doorway of the kitchen and simply stared. His daughters were covered in flour, laughing so hard they could barely stand, while Catherine showed them how to knead dough. Sophie's smile was genuine. Clara's eyes were bright and clear. They looked like children again, not the angry, hurt creatures they'd become after their mother died. Something twisted in James's chest. His wife had been a good woman, kind, proper, but had she been happy? He'd never really known. She'd played her role as the rancher's wife perfectly, but there had always been something distant in her eyes, something unreachable. He'd loved her, or thought he had, but now he wondered if they'd both just been going through the motions of what a marriage should look like. The evenings became their time, his and Catherine's. After the girls went to bed, they'd sit on the back porch with coffee and talk. Real talk, the kind that stripped away pretense and got to the heart of things. One night, James told her about his wife's death, how she'd caught fever during a storm while he was away on business, how the girls had called for him, but he hadn't been there, how he'd arrived home to find her already gone and his daughters looking at him like he betrayed them. She was good, James said, staring into his coffee cup, but I'm not sure she was happy here. I think she married me because it was expected. I think she stayed because leaving wasn't an option. I gave her everything except the one thing that mattered. What was that? Catherine asked softly. The freedom to choose, he said. To choose her own life. To be more than just my wife and their mother. Catherine understood that more than he knew. Sometimes good and happy are different things, she said quietly. James looked at her then, really looked at her. You know something about that, don't you? About not being free to choose. Catherine's hands tightened around her cup. He was getting too close to truths she couldn't tell. We all have our prisons, she said carefully. You're running from something, James said. It wasn't a question. I can see it in the way you watch the road. The way you flinch when strangers come to the door. Whatever it is, whoever it is, you don't have to face it alone. Aren't we all running from something, Mr. Blackwood? Catherine deflected, using his formal name like a shield. He let it go, but something had shifted between them. An understanding, an acknowledgement of unspoken truths. The storm came on a Tuesday, rolling in fast and violent from the north. Dark clouds swallowed the sun by mid-afternoon. Wind howled around the house, rattling windows and bending trees. Rain hammered the roof like bullets. The girls were terrified. Sophie tried to hide it with bravado, but her hands shook. Clara clung to Catherine immediately, whimpering about the night their mama died. "It was a storm like this," Sophie whispered, her defiance crumbling. "Papa wasn't home. Mama got sick. She called for him, but he didn't come." The words hit James like a physical blow. He'd been standing in the doorway, but now he seemed to shrink, his face going pale. The guilt he carried wasn't just his own imagination. His daughters blamed him. Of course they did. Catherine made the decision in a heartbeat. "Come on," she said, gathering both girls. "We're going to have an adventure. We'll camp in the living room, tell stories, pretend we're explorers in a cave waiting out a dragon attack." She spent the next hour turning their fear into a game. Built a fort from blankets and chairs. Lit candles when the power flickered. Told wild tales of brave knights and clever princesses who outsmarted monsters. The girls slowly relaxed, caught up in the stories, the storm outside becoming just background noise to Catherine's voice. The storm lasted 3 days. 3 days trapped inside while wind and rain battered the ranch. 3 days where Catherine kept the girls occupied and calm, where she transformed terror into adventure. James watched her work magic he'd never managed with his own children. She didn't dismiss their fears. She didn't tell them to be brave. She just sat with them in their fear and made it smaller by being there. On the second night, after the girls finally fell asleep in their blanket fort, James sat alone in his study with a bottle of whiskey. Catherine found him there near midnight, slumped in his chair, glass in hand, staring at nothing. "They don't blame you for her death," Catherine said from the doorway. "They should," James said without looking up. "I wasn't there. I'm never there when it matters. I was building this empire, making money, securing their future, and I missed everything that mattered. I missed my wife dying. I missed my daughter's hearts breaking." Catherine walked into the room, took the glass from his hand, and set it aside. "You're here now. That's what matters." "Is it?" James looked up at her, his eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. "Is being here now enough to make up for all the times I wasn't?" "I don't know," Catherine said honestly. "But it's a start. And those girls, they need you to try. They need you to be present, even if you weren't before." "Like you're trying?" James asked quietly. "Even though you're planning to leave?" The words hung in the air between them. Catherine had no answer. The power chose that moment to go out completely. Darkness swallowed the room. Catherine stumbled in the sudden blackness, and James was there, catching her by the arms. They were close, so close she could feel his breath on her face, could smell the whiskey, and something else, something uniquely him. Her heart hammered her chest. "Why did you really take this job?" James whispered. "No one comes to the middle of nowhere without a reason." "I needed somewhere no one would find me," Catherine said, the truth slipping out before she could stop it. "Who's looking?" "Someone I can't face. Someone I'm not strong enough to face." James's hands were still on her arms, steady and warm. "Then don't face them alone." Catherine pulled away, the moment breaking like glass. "You don't understand what you're offering," she said, her voice shaking. She fled to her room before he could respond, before she could make promises she couldn't keep. The next morning, the storm had passed. Weak sunlight filtered through the windows. The girls woke refreshed and happy, their fear forgotten. They begged Catherine to help them make breakfast, and together they created a mess of pancakes and syrup that had everyone laughing. Sophie and Clara sat at the kitchen table, and Clara pulled out her crayons. "I want to draw our family," she announced. Catherine's breath caught, but she said nothing. She watched as Clara carefully drew 4 stick figures. A tall man, 2 small girls with curly hair, and a woman in the middle, holding both girls' hands. Above the drawing, Clara wrote in her careful child's handwriting, "The Blackwood family." Sophie looked at it and nodded her approval. "That's us," she said simply. "Now we're a real family." Catherine's heart shattered and soared at the same time. She wanted to tell them not to get attached, that she'd be leaving soon, that she couldn't be their family. But the words wouldn't come, because some part of her, some hungry, desperate part, wanted it to be true. That afternoon, while the girls napped, James's ranch foreman rode up to the house. Catherine was in the garden, trying to work off the anxiety that had been building in her chest all day. She saw the two men talking, saw James's face go serious. Then both of them looked toward her. Her blood ran cold. James walked over slowly. "Catherine, Bill says there's been a stranger in town, asking questions." The world tilted. What kind of questions? About new arrivals. About women traveling alone. He was well-dressed, Bill said. City type. Said he was looking for his wife. Catherine couldn't breathe. Thomas. He'd found her. After 6 months of running, of hiding, of looking over her shoulder, he'd finally caught up. "You know who it is?" James said. It wasn't a question. Catherine nodded, unable to speak. "Then we'll deal with it," James said firmly. "You're under my protection now." "You don't understand," Catherine whispered. "You can't protect me from him. No one can." That night, while everyone slept, Catherine packed her small bundle again. She moved silently through her room, gathering the few things she owned. The silver locket, the newspaper clipping, the memories of one perfect week where she'd felt almost human again. She'd leave before dawn, disappear before Thomas could find her here, before he could hurt these people who'd shown her kindness. She was tying up her bundle when she heard it. Footsteps in the hall. James stood in her doorway, taking in the packed bag, the resolution on her face. "Don't," he said simply. "I have to. If he finds me here, if he makes a scene, it'll ruin you. The girls have been through enough." "So have you," James said. "And I'm not letting you run anymore." Before Catherine could argue, before she could explain why staying was impossible, they heard it. The sound of hoofbeats on the driveway. At this hour, near midnight, no one came to Blackwood Ranch unless they were bringing trouble. James and Catherine rushed to the window. A lone rider approached in the moonlight. Even from a distance, even in shadow, Catherine knew that silhouette. The way he sat in the saddle, the tilt of his head, the confidence of a man who always got what he wanted. Thomas Whitmore had arrived. Catherine's knees went weak. "He's here," she whispered. "God help me, he's here." Catherine couldn't move. She stood frozen at the window, watching Thomas Whitmore dismount from his horse with the casual confidence of a man who'd never been told no. He straightened his expensive coat, looked up at the house like he already owned it, and walked toward the front door. "Stay here," James said, his voice hard. "Let me handle this." "You don't understand what he's like," Catherine whispered. "He'll twist everything. He'll make you believe I'm the problem. Then you'll tell me the truth after," James said. "But right now, you stay out of sight." Catherine nodded and stepped back from the window, her whole body shaking. She could hear James going downstairs, heard the heavy knock on the door, heard it open. Then Thomas's voice, smooth as silk and just as dangerous. "Good evening. I apologize for the late hour. My name is Thomas Whitmore, and I'm looking for my wife." Catherine crept to the top of the stairs where she could hear but not be seen. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. "Your wife?" James's voice was carefully neutral. "Yes, Catherine Whitmore. She's been unwell, you see. Left home several months ago during a rather difficult episode. I've been searching for her ever since." Thomas's voice carried the perfect mixture of concern and exhaustion. "I was told in town that a woman matching her description came to work here. I do hope it's her. I've been so terribly worried." The lie was so smooth, so practiced. Catherine had heard him use that same tone with his business partners, with the police, with anyone who questioned him. He was a master at playing the concerned, reasonable man. "There's a woman working here," James said slowly. "But she never mentioned a husband." "No, she wouldn't," Thomas said with a sad sigh. "Part of her condition, I'm afraid. She becomes confused, creates new identities, tells elaborate stories. The doctors say it's a break from reality brought on by trauma. Here, I have documentation." Catherine knew what he was showing James. The forged medical papers, the marriage certificate, the carefully constructed lie that painted her as mentally unstable, as someone who couldn't be trusted. I appreciate your care for her, Thomas continued, but she needs proper medical attention. She needs to come home where I can look after her. Perhaps we should ask the lady what she wants, James said. Thomas's voice hardened just slightly. With all due respect, Mr. Blackwood, she's my wife. Legally, she doesn't have a choice. Catherine couldn't hide any longer. She walked down the stairs, each step feeling like walking to her own execution. When Thomas saw her, his face transformed into perfect concern, but his eyes promised violence later. She knew that look. She'd seen it the night she ran. "Catherine, darling," he said, moving toward her. "Thank God. I've been so worried." "Don't touch me," Catherine said, her voice stronger than she felt. Thomas stopped, but he smiled like she'd just proven his point. "You see, Mr. Blackwood, the paranoia, the fear of the people who love her most. It's heartbreaking." "I'm not paranoid," Catherine said. "And you don't love me. You never did. Sweetheart, please. Let's go home, and we can work through this with your doctors." "I'm not going anywhere with you." Thomas's mask slipped for just a second. "You're my wife. You'll do as you're told." That's when the girls appeared at the top of the stairs. They must have woken up from a noise. Sophie and Clara stood there in their nightgowns, watching with wide, frightened eyes. "She's not leaving," Sophie shouted down. "She's ours." Thomas looked up at them with cold calculation. "Children, I understand you've grown fond of your governess, but she belongs with her family." "G.I.S. our family," Clara cried. James stepped between Thomas and the stairs. "I think you should leave. Come back tomorrow with proper authorities if you must, but right now, you're frightening the children." "I'm frightening them." Thomas's voice rose. "Your hired help is a mentally unstable woman who abandoned her husband and her responsibilities. And you've let her around your children unsupervised." "Get out," James said quietly. The words carried more threat than any shout. Thomas stared at him for a long moment, then smiled that cold, calculated smile. "Very well, but I'll return tomorrow with the sheriff. And Catherine, darling, you will be coming home with me, one way or another." He turned and walked out, but the threat hung in the air like smoke. Catherine watched him right away, knowing this wasn't over. It was just beginning. The moment the door closed, her knees gave out. James caught her before she hit the floor. The girls ran down the stairs, both of them wrapping their arms around her, crying. "We won't let him take you," Sophie said fiercely. "Tell her, Papa. Tell her she doesn't have to go." James looked at Catherine, his jaw set with determination. "Tell me everything. The truth this time." So she did, sitting on the floor with the girls clinging to her and James listening intently. Catherine told them all of it. The marriage to Thomas, the control, the isolation, the discovery of his embezzlement, the threats, the escape, the months of running. When she finished, James was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that changed everything. "Marry me." Catherine stared at him. "What? Marry me? If you're my wife, you're under my legal protection. We can fight his claim, file for annulment of your first marriage. And in the meantime, he can't touch you." "You can't do that," Catherine whispered. "Your reputation, the girls, everything you've built." "My girls need you," James said simply, "and I won't let him take you." Sophie and Clara looked between the adults, hardly daring to breathe. "Marry him, Catherine," Sophie begged. "Please. Then you'll be our real mama, and nobody can take you away." Catherine looked at their desperate faces, at James's determined expression, at the life she wanted but never thought she could have. And she made her choice. "Yes," she whispered, "I'll marry you." There was no time to waste. James sent his foreman to fetch his lawyer friend before dawn. The man arrived within the hour, sleepy but alert when he heard the situation. He spread papers across the dining table while Catherine paced nervously and the girls sat watching with wide eyes. "It's risky," the lawyer said, adjusting his glasses. "As her legal husband, Thomas has rights. But if we marry you two immediately and file for annulment of the first marriage based on duress and abandonment, We can at least delay him. Buy time to build a case. How much time? James asked. Depends on how hard he fights. Could be weeks. Could be months. Then we do it now, James said, before he comes back with the sheriff. The lawyer nodded. I'll prepare the documents. We can have this ceremony at dawn in your chapel. Keep it simple and fast. Sophie jumped up. Mama Catherine needs a dress. She can't get married in that old thing. The word mama hung in the air. Catherine's eyes filled with tears. Clara took her hand and squeezed it tight. Come on, Sophie said, pulling Catherine toward the stairs. We'll find you something pretty. In the late Mrs. Blackwood's closet, the girls found a simple white dress. It wasn't fancy, but it was beautiful in its simplicity. Catherine held it against herself, feeling strange wearing a dead woman's clothes to marry her husband. But there was no time for new dresses or second thoughts. She want you to have it, Clara said quietly, as if reading her mind. She want Papa to be happy again. The girls helped Catherine get ready, brushing her hair and weaving wildflowers from the garden into it. For a moment, Catherine forgot this was a marriage of convenience, a legal strategy. For a moment, she let herself imagine this was real. Dawn came soft and golden. In the small chapel on the ranch property, they gathered. Just James, Catherine, the girls, the lawyer, and the local priest who'd been roused from sleep with promises of extra payment for his discretion. Sophie and Clara wore their best dresses, carrying flowers and grinning with barely contained excitement. The priest opened his Bible. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today. The chapel doors burst open. Thomas Whitmore stood in the doorway with the sheriff and 2 deputies behind him. Stop this farce immediately. The sheriff looked apologetic but firm. Mr. Blackwood, I'm afraid this woman is already married. This ceremony cannot continue. Thomas walked down the aisle like he owned the place. She's my wife. This is bigamy, and you know it. The lawyer stepped forward. We filed for annulment of the previous marriage based on. Filed, not granted, Thomas interrupted. She's still legally mine. He looked at the sheriff. Arrest her for attempted bigamy. Arrest him for aiding it. The girl screamed. Sophie grabbed Catherine's arm. Clara wrapped herself around James's leg. Both were crying, desperate. You can't take her. Sophie shouted. The sheriff moved forward reluctantly. I'm sorry, Miss Monroe, but her name is Whitmore. Thomas corrected coldly. And she's coming with me. James stepped between them. Then arrest me too. Charge me with whatever you want. But you're not taking her without a fight. Gladly, Thomas said, his mask of civility completely gone now. You've interfered with my marriage, turned my wife against me. And now you're trying to steal her in some pathetic legal trick. Maybe because she's terrified of you. James shot back. Maybe because she ran for her life. Thomas grabbed Catherine's arm, yanking her toward him. She ran because she's unstable. She needs help. My help. The violence in his grip was clear. Catherine cried out in pain. That's when James lost control. He pulled Thomas off her, and for a moment the 2 men struggled. The ranch hands who'd been waiting outside rushed in. Thomas was pulled back, shouting threats. Stop! The sheriff's voice cut through the chaos. Everyone, stop right now. He'd been watching Thomas carefully, watching how he grabbed Catherine, watching the rage in his eyes. The sheriff had been in law enforcement long enough to recognize a dangerous man when he saw one. Mr. Whitmore, the sheriff said slowly, funny thing happened this morning. Got a telegram from Denver. Bank examiners asking about you. Something about missing funds and falsified records. Thomas went very still. That's absurd. Is it? The sheriff pulled the telegram from his pocket. Says here they've been looking for you for 3 months. Says you fled before they could bring charges. He looked at Catherine. Is that what you were running from, ma'am? His crimes. Catherine nodded, finding her voice. He stole from the bank. When I discovered it and confronted him, he threatened me. I ran because I was afraid. Afraid of what he'd do to keep me quiet. She's lying. Thomas shouted, but the desperation in his voice betrayed him. The sheriff made his decision. Thomas Whitmore, You're under arrest for embezzlement and fraud. And from what I just saw, we'll add assault to that list. This is ridiculous. Thomas struggled as the deputies moved toward him. She's my wife. You can't. Actually, the lawyer spoke up. Given that you're now a wanted criminal who fled prosecution, I believe we have grounds for immediate annulment. A marriage obtained through deception and maintained through intimidation. Thomas was dragged away, still shouting threats, still promising he'd come back, still trying to maintain control, even as it slipped through his fingers. Catherine watched him go, her whole body shaking. She couldn't quite believe it was over. The chapel fell silent. The priest cleared his throat. Well, shall we continue? Catherine turned to James. She was free now, truly free. He didn't have to marry her. This could end right here. You don't have to do this anymore, she whispered. I'm safe now. James took her hands in his. Then, to everyone's surprise, he got down on one knee right there in front of the altar. Catherine Monroe, he said quietly, I'm not asking because you need protection. I'm asking because in 1 week, you brought life back into this house. You made my daughters laugh again. You made me feel again. His voice dropped. I'm asking because I love you. Will you marry me? Sophie and Clara held their breath. The whole room waited. Catherine looked down at this man who'd offered her everything without asking for anything in return. This man who'd fought for her. These girls who'd called her mama. This family that had somehow become hers. Yes, she said, tears streaming down her face. Yes, I'll marry you. The ceremony was completed with everyone crying happy tears. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, James kissed Catherine like she was the most precious thing in the world. The girls rushed forward, and they all held each other, a real family at last. Outside the chapel, the morning sun rose bright and clear. Thomas was gone. The threat was over, and Catherine finally could stop running. The first week of marriage was strange. Catherine had gone from being a hired companion to being Mrs. Blackwood, mistress of the ranch, mother to 2 girls who called her mama without hesitation. But between her and James, there was an awkwardness neither quite knew how to navigate. They'd married in crisis. Now, they had to figure out how to actually be married. James insisted Catherine take the master bedroom while he moved to a guest room down the hall. No pressure, he'd said. We'll take our time. Figure this out as we go. Catherine was grateful for his patience, but she also felt guilty. He'd given her everything and asked for nothing in return. Some nights, she'd lie awake wondering if she'd trapped him in a marriage he didn't really want. Wondering if his proposal had been more about protecting her than loving her. The nightmares came in the darkest hours. Catherine would wake gasping, seeing Thomas's face, feeling his hand on her arm. The first time it happened, she tried to muffle her cries in her pillow. But James heard. He appeared in her doorway, concerned and careful. May I? He asked, gesturing to the chair beside her bed. She nodded, too shaken to speak. He sat with her until her breathing calmed, talking quietly about nothing important. Just his presence made the fear smaller. After that, it became their unspoken routine. When nightmares came, James would sit with her until dawn. The girls adjusted faster than the adults. Sophie and Clara were ecstatic to officially have a mother again. But even they had moments of fear. One morning, Sophie tested Catherine at breakfast. You can't leave us now, she said with forced casualness. You're married. You're stuck here. Catherine set down her coffee and looked Sophie straight in the eye. I'm not here because I'm stuck. I'm here because I choose to be. Every single day, I wake up and choose you. But what if you stop choosing us? Clara asked quietly, the real fear underneath. Catherine pulled both girls close. Loving someone isn't just a feeling that comes and goes. It's a choice you make over and over. And I choose you too. Always. The town had mixed reactions to the hasty marriage. Some whispered that the rich rancher had married his servant. Others gossiped that Catherine had trapped him. But when the full story came out, when people learned she'd been fleeing an abusive criminal, the tone shifted. The women especially understood. Several came to visit, bringing pies and welcome gifts, sharing their own stories of difficult marriages and hard choices. Mrs. Henderson from the general store arrived one afternoon with a basket of preserves. "I was wrong about you," she said simply. "I judged too quickly. You're exactly what this family needed." Catherine accepted the apology with grace, understanding that small towns ran on gossip, but also on grudging respect for those who survived. 1 month after the wedding, James found Catherine in the garden. She was teaching the girls how to plant vegetables for the fall harvest. The afternoon sun caught in her hair, and she was laughing at something Sophie said. James stood watching, his heart doing something strange in his chest. That evening, after the girls went to bed, Catherine found him on the back porch. Their spot. She sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. "I've been thinking," Catherine said carefully, "about us, about this marriage." James tensed, afraid she was about to say she wanted to leave. "I don't know how to be a wife," she continued. "My first marriage wasn't real. It was a prison. I don't have good examples to follow." "Then we make our own rules," James said. "No one else's marriage has to look like ours." Catherine turned to face him. "I need you to know something. I didn't just say yes to save myself. I said yes because somewhere between that first night and now, this became real for me. You became real. The girls became real. This family became everything." James reached for her hand. "I need you to know something too. I didn't propose just to protect you. I proposed because you woke me up. For 2 years, I was just going through the motions, and then you showed up at my door and reminded me what it felt like to actually live." "So what now?" Catherine asked. "Now we stop being careful," James said. "Stop treating this like it might break. We're married. Let's actually be married." Catherine smiled, and for the first time since the wedding, she leaned in and kissed him. Not the ceremonial kiss at the altar, but a real kiss. A choice. A beginning. When they pulled apart, both were crying a little. James stood and offered his hand. "Come on, let's go to bed." "Our bed." Catherine took his hand and let him lead her inside. That night, for the first time, she slept in a master bedroom with her husband beside her. No nightmares came, just peace. 3 months passed. Fall arrived with golden leaves and cooler air. The girls started school in town, thriving with their new confidence. Catherine ran the household with quiet efficiency, earning the respect of the staff and the community. She and James grew closer each day, learning each other in the small moments. How he took his coffee, how she hummed while she worked, the way they'd find each other's eyes across a room and smile. One evening in late October, Catherine called a family meeting at dinner. The girls looked worried, always afraid that good things wouldn't last. James squeezed her hand under the table, supportive. "I have some news," Catherine said, her voice shaking a little. "Something wonderful." She looked at the girls. "Next spring, we're going to be big sisters." There was a moment of stunned silence. Then Sophie shrieked with joy. Clara burst into happy tears. They both jumped up and threw their arms around Catherine, talking over each other with excitement. "A baby? A real baby? Will it be a boy or a girl? Can we help pick the name?" James pulled Catherine into his arms, his eyes wet. "Are you sure?" he whispered. "The doctor confirmed it yesterday," Catherine said. "We're going to have a baby." That night, with the girls finally asleep after hours of excited planning, James and Catherine stood together looking out at their land. The ranch stretched before them in the moonlight, solid and real and theirs. "A year ago, I was alone and terrified," Catherine said softly. "I thought my life was over. And now?" James asked. "Now I have everything I never knew I needed. A home, daughters, a husband I actually love, and a baby coming." She turned to him. "How did I get so lucky?" "We both got lucky," James said. "The day you knocked on my door." They stood together in comfortable silence. Two people who'd found each other at exactly the right moment. Two people who'd built something real from desperate beginnings. The future stretched ahead of them, full of promise and possibility. And Catherine finally, truly believed she deserved it. Christmas came to Blackwood Ranch with snow and warmth. The house glowed with candles and pine garlands. Catherine stood in the kitchen making cookies with the girls, her belly round with 6 months of pregnancy. She caught her reflection in the window and barely recognized herself. The hollow-cheeked, desperate woman who'd arrived a year ago was gone. In her place stood someone confident, loved, and finally at peace. "Mama, you're burning the cookies." Sophie laughed, pulling the tray from the oven just in time. Catherine smiled at the word mama. It still made her heart full every time she heard it. That evening, the whole family decorated the tree together. James lifted the girls one at a time to place ornaments on the highest branches. Clara hung a special one she'd made at school, a wooden ornament painted with careful letters. The Blackwood family: James, Catherine, Sophie, Clara, and baby. "Now we're all here," Clara said with satisfaction. Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. "Last Christmas, I was alone and starving. I didn't think I'd survive the winter." James wrapped his arm around her. "Last Christmas, we were just going through the motions. You taught us how to really live again." On Christmas morning, after presents were opened and wrapping paper littered the floor, James pulled Catherine aside. "There's one more gift," he said, handing her an envelope. Inside was a letter. Catherine recognized the handwriting immediately. Her sister's. The sister she'd lost touch with during her marriage to Thomas. The sister who believed his lies about Catherine being unstable. "She found us through the newspaper announcements," James explained. "She wants to reconnect. She's sorry she didn't believe you. I wrote back and invited her to visit in the spring." Catherine couldn't speak through her tears. Family restored. Family expanded. Everything she'd lost, found again. The girls ran back in, demanding attention. "Can we go play in the snow?" "Bundle up first," Catherine said automatically, already moving to help them with their coats. James watched his wife mother his daughters with such natural grace. Watched her laugh when Sophie threw a snowball that missed spectacularly. Watched her carefully help Clara build a snowman, despite her pregnant belly making it difficult. This was his family, complete and real in his. That night, after the girls finally fell asleep exhausted from play, James and Catherine sat on their porch wrapped in blankets. Snow fell softly around them, covering the ranch in fresh white. "Do you ever regret it?" Catherine asked suddenly. "Taking a stranger? Marrying someone you barely knew?" James pulled her closer. "Every single day." Catherine's face fell until she saw his grin. "I regret not doing it sooner," he continued. "Regret not kissing you that first week. Regret every moment before you came into our lives." Catherine laughed and playfully hit his arm. "You scared me for a second." "Good. Keeps things interesting." He placed his hand on her belly, feeling the baby kick. "What are you thinking about?" "About how I came here in rags, asking for work. How I planned to stay 1 month and disappear. How I thought I didn't deserve good things." She looked up at him. "And how wrong I was about everything." "Not everything," James said. "You were right about one thing." "What's that?" "That you needed somewhere no one would find you. You needed somewhere safe." He kissed her forehead. "You just didn't know you were coming home." Catherine rested her head on his shoulder, watching the snow fall on their land, their home, their future. Inside, their daughter slept peacefully. In her belly, their baby kicked strong and healthy. Beside her, her husband held her like she was something precious. She'd arrived desperate and broken, expecting nothing, deserving nothing. But she found everything. A man who saw past her rags to her heart. Daughters who taught her that family wasn't about blood. A home she chose that chose her back. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," James replied. "Forever, forever," Catherine echoed. And she finally believed it. The running was over. The fear was gone. She was Catherine Blackwood, wife and mother, loved and safe. She was home. The snow continued to fall, soft and steady, covering everything in new white. Inside the warm house, the fire crackled. Tomorrow would bring more laughter, more life, more love. But tonight, this moment was perfect. Catherine closed her eyes and breathed in the cold air, the wood smoke, the promise of everything good still to come. She'd come here asking for work. He'd asked her to be a mother, but she'd become so much more. She'd become herself, the woman she was always meant to be. And as the clock struck midnight on Christmas, as one year ended and another began, Catherine Monroe Blackwood made a silent promise to never take this gift for granted, to choose this family every day, to love fiercely and without fear, to be present for every moment. She'd been given a second chance at life, and she intended to live it fully. The end of her old story, the beginning of forever.